Welcome to Unmuzzled Chat. Folks, I apologize. It's a little early. I'm still working the frog out of my, excuse me, there it is, out of my voice box. Now, I'm really excited to have Derrick on Unmuzzled Chat here today. He is a soldier. He is showing up on the front lines on behalf of not just all his comrades, but all civilians, this country. He's a man that really believes in his oath. And we're going to dive into that. We're going to get to hear more about his journey and the tyranny he has in fact experienced. And damn it, I am so proud of these warriors showing up and doing what they're doing. And they need our support. So please stay tuned. Listen to what he has to say. We can more effectively see to it that there's accountability, see to it that this tyranny doesn't continue. Just a toxic cycle in this world we live in. And these warriors are really leading the way and giving us solutions. So with that being said, Derrick, welcome to Unmuzzled Chat, brother. How you doing today?
Doing all right. Thank you very much for having me.
It is my pleasure. So you sent me a video clip on YouTube yesterday, and it was just, my jaw hit the floor. And I know we're all our own worst critics, but who was it you were addressing in that video? It was that
was a staffer for my Congressman Brian Babin. He's kind of like the gatekeeper that keeps me from actually speaking to the congressman himself.
Oh my gosh!
So it's like a guy that works in his office. I've been speaking with him for about two and a half years, and he passes me on to another guy by the name of Danny Smith, who's like their lead military legislative assistant. And those are the two people that I've basically been able to speak with at my congressman's office instead of my congressman. And I've been trying as hard as I can for the last almost 3 years to try to get a sit-down meeting and speak with him directly about some pretty important issues facing veterans. Some veterans like myself and thousands others like me who were unlawfully discharged or, had saw unjust punishment against them for refusing to comply with the unlawful mandates of EUA products that were being falsely represented as FDA approved vaccines for the COVID-19 pandemic.
It is not only criminal what they were trying to impose upon you, but it is downright criminal how you guys have been treated in the flak and everything since. And
yes, sir.
It is clear that these individuals that you were trying to address your grievances with, by design, their slave masters should be we the people. Obviously, we're not going to be a horrific slave master. They are put in a position to address our grievances. And it is just horrifying that it is clear the level of corruption to where it is no longer that way. They appease their slave masters on a globalist scale. And it's just sickening. It really makes me scratch my head as to how did they get to infiltrate so deeply across the board? Is it money? Is it just a chain of command? Are there flaws in the infrastructure that need to be addressed and checks and balances to ensure it operates as it initially was designed? There's a lot of major questions, but every American should be like greatly concerned because you're bringing up a big issue and it is purposely getting like swept under the rug. And as you put, they're dragging their feet on. And just a spoiler, but we'll dive into it, they're already shifting into the next potential pandemic with monkeypox. And there's whispers as to potential mandates in the armed forces even regarding that. So once again, it's like, to all our listeners, we got to open our eyes. What else did we expect without properly addressing the past pandemic? All that being said, Derrick, we're going to be diving into a lot here. I want to know a little more about you. So, to get a bit of your background, wherever you feel like diving in, what branch you served, how long, and then we'll get into kind of just what happened with you a bit. So, you go ahead and start wherever you feel.
Certainly. I served 2 years as an infantryman in the United States Army. I joined pretty late in life. All my life I wanted to serve, but I didn't really feel that the war in Iraq was being fought for just causes. So when it came time to re-enlist right out of high school, I went to MEPS and I enlisted. But the day before shipping out, I just had second thoughts and didn't ship out. And then, all throughout the rest of my life, I kind of, I had this urge to serve, this urge to, pay back this debt that I feel I owe to like the greatest country that there's ever been. And eventually that, at 29 years old, I started to realize that window of opportunity to serve was getting smaller and smaller. So I flipped a coin and it came up heads. And the next day I was at the recruiting office and I enlisted with an option 40 contract to join Ranger Regiment. I got hurt during the selection process, dropped from that, sent to Fort Hood. And then it was I joined during the height of the pandemic. At that time, there was no mandates. Everybody could kind of see that they were going to be pushing for them, but at the time there was no mandates, and the government was still pushing everything under the impression of all of this is voluntary. They didn't want any vaccine skepticism, so they were still in the incentivization process of the vaccines. This is the time when they were handing out donuts and $100 gift cards and double cheeseburgers if you got vaccinated and stuff, because they cared so much about your health. So they were still pretending at that phase. They hadn't began ostracizing everybody who was against it, or they hadn't began making you out to be a criminal at that point. So I thought I was safe. I didn't really think that would ever happen, especially not in the military. So I enlisted, and then the pandemic came down, and it was all downhill from there.
Golly. I'm glad you even brought up
the mandate came down, and it was all downhill from there.
Right. An illegal mandate. Because folks don't really understand. I mean, it's body autonomy, and I know certain individuals just say, hey, at the point you sign up, like you're basically giving your body over to the military and they can do with it what they will to an extent. But the reality of it is there still are laws that have been put in place to ensure we still have some sense of freedom. And
you do not lose your human rights when you volunteer to serve your country.
That's a good point.
You lose some of those rights, your rights to get up when you want to get up and not show up to work. You lose those rights, but you lose your rights as a human being to not be experimented on with experimental mRNA technology.
Right.
There's the Nuremberg trials were set, this exact thing.
Yes.
The anthrax trials were set up to protect, the human rights of service members.
Yes. And
I can lay it out perfectly, that they played a perfect, premeditated game of bait and switch. That's what they did. So on August 24th, 2021, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin used this memorandum that he put out, and basically it said mandatory vaccination against COVID-19 will only use COVID-19 vaccines that received a full licensure from the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, in accordance with the FDA approved labeling and guidance, end quote. Okay. So when this came down, at the time, everybody in the military was even, people surrounding me. There was talk of a mandate, but they heavily incentivized people. So when people started talking about the mandates, everybody's sitting around saying, oh, I'm not going to take it. I'm not going to take it. They're going to have to hold me down, blah, 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 blah. Well, then they started using these mechanisms of coercion.
Yes.
Where You know, oh, if you're not vaccinated, you can't go to these high population areas off post for the weekend. You know, so these young impressionable guys who are already hating life sucks. You know, you want to get off post and go to some big city and, you know, party with your friends. These young impressionable guys are not thinking anything of it. They go out and get vaccinated just to get them off their back so they can go have fun. Boom.
Wow.
You've got about 30% of the armed forces right there, you know, and then you use these other mechanisms. You know, we went on a 9-month rotation. My buddies were over there for 9 months. And the day before we fly back, you know, normally when you go on a long rotation, you're given a couple weeks of leave to go see your family, you know, when you get home. Well, they tell these guys, you know, 2 days before we fly out, like, hey, yeah, if you're not vaccinated, you're not going to be able to go on leave. You know, we're not going to approve your leave packets. So, you know, you've been sitting over here missing your family for 9 months. We're going to make sure you can't go see them as long as you're not back. They did everything they could do to make sure that we voluntarily got this vaccine so that they would not be held accountable when the inevitable, you know, adverse health effects came out. They used coercion tactics to get everyone to take. That's why they incentivize the citizens with donuts and, you know, nothing is free in this world. Nothing is free. You know, you made a deal that you probably shouldn't have made. But anyways, they put out this mandate, you know, and then people within the military start saying, okay, well, where's the FDA approved vaccine? You know, so they start looking into the fact that there hasn't been any FDA approved vaccines. So a lot of people either are, in my case, requesting an FDA approved vaccine, or in another case, they're filing for religious accommodation requests, basically saying that it's against their religious views to receive these vaccines. And a lot of people, I'll admit, a lot of people that didn't have religious views just use this as an out, you know,
Right.
and they saw this as a way to get around it, and they shouldn't have done that. You know, they should have opposed it straight on because it wasn't valid to begin with. Them, you know, capitulating basically and filing for these religious accommodations, it's almost like you're admitting that what they're saying is true and justified, and you have to find a way out of it, but the burden was on them. And so a lot of people filed for religious accommodation requests, and there were a lot of people that genuinely had religious, you know, views and religious oppositions to the vaccines. I know chaplains who were told that they didn't have strong enough, you know, religious convictions to receive a religious accommodation. So what they did is they blanket denied all of these religious accommodations, hundreds and thousands of them, like they were just clicking through them as fast as they could. Deny, 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 deny. You know, there were actually people who went through, and if they had gone through, it was like they were spending like 18 seconds a piece or something like that. It was like a minuscule number on each of these cases where they were just burning through them, denying all of them, which is unconstitutional. So there's a crime right there. Just blanket denying all of these, you know, religious accommodations. They process those religious accommodations faster than any paperwork's ever been processed in, you know, military history. And so then there was these other people in my category, which were just staunchly opposed to the fact that this was an unlawful order to begin with, because we were basically calling the military's bluff, and we were saying, okay, we want you to follow the regulation that you put out and provide us with the FDA approved vaccines that we're being required to take. We know you don't have them in your possession because there haven't been any manufactured. What happened is Corminati received FDA approval, and the same day that it received approval, its approval was pulled and it was never produced. And then what they did was piggyback all of these EUA products, emergency use authorized vaccines, which haven't gone through nearly as many rigorous testing, haven't gone through pretty much any testing, really.
Pfizer invented it themselves.
Exactly. But during the time, if you were to say anything, if you were to be skeptical at it at all, they painted you out like some kind of like whack job. So they piggyback these EUA vaccines onto the FDA approval of Corminati, and then they start just pumping these out. Well, then after they realized that we had them in kind of like a checkmate situation legally, and the whole time this is happening, they're gauging our response and they're kind of like throttling back and pushing based off of like the temperament of the people within the ranks. And the whole time they were running operations to judge people's responses to this. They targeted captains and commanders, and they use this as like a readiness issue. And they basically said, if you can't get your force vaccinated, we aren't going to be a lethal fighting force. We aren't going to be able to go to battle because COVID's going to kill us all. So this is a readiness issue. If you can't get the job done, get 99% of your people vaccinated, we'll replace you with somebody who will. So then the command is now incentivized to look out for themselves and their own job. And a lot of people in these positions faltered when they should have been protecting those underneath them. They chose the path of self-preservation. Well, so then there's this legal battle going on in the conversation between the legality, because there's a medical and a legal distinction between FDA approved and EUA authorized. And the memo that was put out was for FDA approved. So we're telling them, okay, the onus is on you to provide the vaccines that you're mandating us to take. You are unable to do that. So then Terry Adderam comes out, and she, I think, is like the Secretary of Health, I believe. She comes out and puts out a memo within the DoD that says, let me find for sure. She puts out on September 14th, 2021, Assistant Secretary of Defense Terry Adderam put out a memo stating the FDA approved and EUA authorized shots were interchangeable with one another and could be used as if doses distributed under the EUA to administer the vaccination series as if the doses were worthy licensed vaccine. I know it sounds like a bunch of mumbo jumbo. Basically, she's saying use these EUA vaccines as if they were FDA approved. This memo that she put out was intentionally put out to muddy the waters around the legality of the FDA approved and EUA authorized vaccines. It was so that, and then what they started doing is basically saying, yeah, we have these EUA authorized vaccines, so they can be used as if they were FDA approved. So now if you're refusing to take them, it's on you. And they kicked out so many people for under this weird wording, and that was the thing too, is there's no playbook for this. So it really just depended on like where you fell in the stack, when people started processing your paperwork, how badly people wanted to press on it, like it was so, people were falling through cracks at every point, because like cracks you could land a jet in, because they were just, there's no playbook for this. When they kicked me out, for violation of a serious offense. That was the code they put on my discharge paperwork when they gave me a general discharge.
Due to strictly you standing against the job. You essentially said, hey, look, if you could provide the FDA. Yes.
Yeah. So I tell my leadership, I want the FDA approved vaccine, and they give me a GOMAR, which is it's like, if an Article 15 in the military is a detention, a GOMAR is like getting expelled, basically. Like it's a career killer, and it's basically like the worst kind of paperwork you can get. It's a general officer memorandum of reprimand, and it goes like in your personal file, follows you forever. You'll never be able to do anything really. And so they gave me this, and I filed an appeal. And in that appeal, I told them, like, hey, I'm requesting the FDA-approved vaccine. I gave them a 30-page PowerPoint basically laying out all the legal distinctions between the vaccines that were being provided and the vaccines that I was mandated to take. I told them in black and white that laws were being broken, and our rights were being violated. And it never even got read. They were just, everything was so cookie cutter. It was like, oh, you're a COVID refusal. Boom. They literally had a template, at the legal office that was like, oh, check all these boxes for the COVID refusals and then pump them out. Not only were they trying to get rid of us as fast as possible in most cases, but they were trying to do whatever they could to put the paperwork as if we were not, like, we weren't COVID. Anything that they could do to administratively separate us and not connect it to COVID. Okay, because they're trying to get rid of that paperwork. So my Gomar wasn't even looked at, and I know it wasn't looked at because there was a small seal on it that wasn't even broken. And that was once it got passed up to higher. One person did read it, and that was my commander. And he was actually pretty helpful the entire time. He went to bat for me as much as he could, but at the end of the day, I mean, he still kind of folded and recommended that I get kicked out. But when he recommended me that I get kicked out, he recommended me for an honorable discharge. And at the time, what was happening is the military was using the threat of dishonorable discharges as like a scare tactic to make us take these vaccines.
Right.
So they were telling us, hey, you're going to be looked at like a felon. You're not going to be able to get a job. You're not going to, blah, 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 blah. So it wasn't until Congress mandated an NDAA of, I think, 2022. My memory's kind of messed up, but
I actually want to take just a second because you breezed over even the threat of becoming a felon, which would even add up to losing your right to bear arms. It is a service member. Like it is unbelievable. I just want civilians and listeners to grasp as to all these tactics, and particularly that one, like to imagine wearing your shoes in that moment. It is unfathomable as to all the tactics. I like how you put it, all the mechanisms that were put into place, and every mechanism along the way, it was like a percentage hit, a percentage hit, a percentage hit, which led to enough percentage that they inevitably were able to get away with it to an egregious criminal level. And it just blows my freaking mind because it's like, here are a bunch of men that swore an oath to, fight against threats, foreign and domestic. And so many of your military men were falling through the cracks, not doing the research that you have done. And now you're viewing it bigger than just a shot. This is a legitimate threat. And now they're even calling the herd regarding real service members, true patriots in our armed forces. Like, this is dangerous on so many levels. I didn't mean to cut you off. You can go ahead.
No,
I'm
no
just
worries, yeah. It's I almost forget sometimes that, like, yeah, they were using everything at their disposal, and it almost showed like a level of premeditation because it was like they were gaming the system, and they would judge how we would react to it, and then they would back throttle, and they would they would propose certain things, and then once they incentivize enough people to get it, then they could change their tactics up, and then it switched up to like, hey, if you don't get this, then there will be consequences, and then for the longest time, like if you weren't vaccinated, you had to stand in separate formations, you had to show up in Monday mornings for like extra testing at like, unbelievably early hours just because it was an inconvenience, and they probably never even read the tests. It was just something to make life suck a little bit more for you. And I file appeal for the GOMAR, and I end up, I get the GOMAR anyways. I'm in the process of getting chaptered out, and for like 9 months, I didn't know if it was going to be. It was literally like any day now they could just come tell me like, hey, you're gone, or hey, we're keeping you in, or whatever. There was a long time where they didn't know what they were going to do with us. And so I was basically set aside into this separate squad of people, and just kind of waiting around to figure out what was going to happen. And, a lot of people were banned from, I was an infantryman, so I wish I would have been able to just be banned from my job and just don't come into work. But that wasn't the case for me. But there was a lot of people who weren't even allowed to come to their job site because of their vaccination status, because they didn't want them talking to other people. They didn't
care about the contagion.
They did not. They sent us home during basic training for holiday block leave, and then still pretended like we were in a quarantine when we got back. It was a joke. We all lived in a 40-man bay in bunk beds. We showered in the same showers, like there was no quarantine whatsoever. It was all formality for them to cover their, COA or CYA. And, it was all basically so that they could try to legally protect themselves. But there was zero real, you'd see people with their masks down up until, leadership came around. And that was the thing, our leadership didn't care unless their leadership was around. And then it's like, oh, everybody put your mask up, pretend like we all had this quarantine, and it was all for show.
Another mechanism that I feel we far too often sweep under the rug, because in a way it's minuscule compared to the actual, I believe, intended consequences of a death jab, genocide, right? But the masks itself, right? Because that was brought on predating all of this for quite a while. But you could see on a psychological level how that, because in the military, they got pretty how should I say it? They got pretty tyrannical even about the masking.
Yeah, right? we had to wear masks while running.
That's
in basic training. We had to wear masks in the summer, in a Georgia summer. We had to wear masks while running. We could pull them below our nose, but we still had to wear them. If we were doing sprints, we could pull them below our nose.
But you're eating next to each other. You're showering next to each other. You're sleeping next to each other.
Yeah, we were literally waterboarding ourselves with our own sweat while running.
That's
because.
That in and of itself, if that's all it was, there still should be full accountability on that level of tyranny. But you could see how that was another mechanism of getting people to comply.
All of this was a litmus test for freedom, to see exactly how much they could get away with. And now they know how much they can get away with. And you see it playing out in the entire world. They know that they locked down the entire world over a lie. They know they can do whatever they want now. And you see it. They're operating with impunity. They're doing things out in the open that people would have had to hide. And if people ever found out, we'd be burning down buildings to get to them.
Such a good point.
They're doing things now with impunity because the mask is off. They overplayed their hand, and they can't put the cookie back in the jar.
No, I see it as
all they have to do is pretend like it never happened, cover our stories up, and then even with these these discharge statuses upgrades, everybody makes a big deal like, oh, they upgraded all the discharge status. All that is covering up paperwork. All that is sweeping it under the rug so that in 30 years, the only thing going against the official narrative is our stories and a couple scraps of paper that prove them wrong. They literally mandated that all of our GOMARs and all the history of all the adverse paperwork against us and all the mistreatment, all that got destroyed because they're covering it up. And then all it takes is for all these discharge statuses to get corrected. And then in the annals of time, no one will know what really happened because they've controlled the narrative for 3 years.
You're right. So some people may be wondering, well, shoot, what can I do? What difference can I make? What can I do? Well, support a warrior like this, like Derrick, like John, the Forgotten Soldiers, Scott, Billy, Chaplain James,
Joel, Ted Macy, Sam Shoemate. These are all people that are on the front lines putting in some serious work. And there's plenty more. Brad Miller. There's so many veterans that have been, adversely affected by these vaccines that nobody wants to even talk about. And it's taken this long for the military to even recognize,
you guys have created websites, you've created documentation, you're submitting forms in the right places.
Yeah, a lot of us had to learn how to conduct lawfare. When this first happened, we were so scattered to the wind, and it took a long time for us to even come together and develop these networks of communication and stuff like that because it was such a contentious subject. You couldn't even talk about certain things online or without getting banned.
Right.
And so once we developed these networks of communication, then we were able to come together, share our stories, realize that we weren't crazy, realize that like all the gaslighting was, truly gaslighting. And then we started formulating a way to truly move forward as a unified unit and get our stories heard. But what's happening is we're taking our grievances to all of our elected representatives, and we're trying to get something done. And in my case, my congressman's refusing to act on this. He's trying to treat me as if like I'm a disgruntled individual who's upset because I got kicked out with a general discharge and left homeless with no benefits and blah 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 blah. I don't care about me. Like I'm coming to him as a canary in a coal mine with a much bigger, a much more serious issue, and it's a stone that they would rather just not turn over, because underneath that stone leads to political, it's going to rock the boat for them one way or the other.
Right.
And you're either on the left. If your elected representative is like on the left, you're an anti-vax conspiracy theorist. And if they're on the right, you're just someone in the military who couldn't hack taking the same vaccines that I took when I was in the military. Well, they don't understand the minutiae distinction between the fact that these are the entirely different vaccines than the ones that we're accustomed to. This isn't the polio vaccine or the tetanus vaccine. These are entirely untested experimental vaccines that we were being used as test subjects for, because all of our medical information is stored in one location. That allows them to use us as a subset of the population and bypass all of the HIPAA laws that would have prevented your doctor from talking to your listener's doctor, from talking to their mother's doctor, and conglomerating all of that data into one place. We were being used as lab rats.
Yes.
And it was because we stopped them in the military. This is the timeline of events. Mandates in the military, mandates for federal employees, mandates for any company that took federal funding, and then mandates for your children. And if we hadn't stopped them in the military and forced them to rescind the mandate without ever actually admitting that it was unlawful to begin with, because then they would have been culpable for all the people that they pumped that shit into, they rescinded the mandate quietly, so that they can then go back and do their AARs, their after action reports, and see what happened, what they did wrong.
Hey,
they would have come for your kids, because we forced them to rescind the mandate without ever actually admitting that it was unlawful. So what that did is allowed them to pull back and then do their AARs, their after action reports, and then see where they messed up, where they forget to cross their T's and dot their I's, and then come back. And that's what they're doing now is with this monkeypox stuff. And that's why politicians have been dragging their feet for the last 2 years, because they don't want us to be able to establish the legal precedents necessary to, to prevent, to expose all the lies that were being told and all the crimes that were committed. That would put a horrible taste in the mouth of all the American citizens, and the world for that matter. And their likelihood to buy into this mRNA technology that's so heavily invested into by these super rich world elite people, their likelihood is drastically going to fall. So that's what's happening. They're trying to control the narrative. They don't want this story to get out because it's a huge poke in the eye of anybody trying to sell you on the benefits of mRNA technology, because it's entirely untested. It's entirely new. It plays with your DNA. This is what I don't understand. We live in 2024, and they're still coming out with updates for Microsoft Office. But you think that scientists have, you're going to let them play with your DNA and like they have this perfectly concocted system, like they can't even perfect Microsoft.
Ooh, I like that analogy. That's why they wanted us to line up for a whole lifelong of jabs.
Well, this is the trick. This is the thing too. They use fear to trick people into taking this vaccine, knowing that it was going to cause myocarditis, pericarditis, all these other side effects, okay, there's proof. They knew.
Yes.
And instead of pulling the vaccines, they started working on how to sell cures for all the sicknesses that their drugs were going to create.
Create the problem. Create a solution. It's a win on both ends to the suffering of we the people. That's where on such a personal level, that's why I felt the pandemic was a smoking gun for all Americans to essentially unite, see past all the fluffery and all the propaganda and the true misinformationists and disinformationists and the liars and manipulators, and gain the proper momentum to rule out the corruption, at least in this country. But it blows my mind as to how many Americans are delusionally trying to go back to a life of normalcy without addressing these things. But
it's a psychology thing. If
$100
you're gonna tell someone they got tricked, you better be ready for them to hate you for it, because they don't want to. Like, if you got tricked into taking this because you were scared,
yes,
and then that's one thing. But if you tricked your children, or if you forced your children to take this because you were scared,
how do you come to terms?
How are you ever going to get a parent to admit that happened? And we need to have grace. You know, we need to have grace for those who were deceived, because they were deceived. If you were deceived, that's different than, than knowingly pushing this for your own self gain. And they use fear, man, as a weapon. You know, they suddenly cared about people's health when there's a McDonald's on every street corner. You know, like, they use fear as a weapon. They made you think that that you were going to kill your own grandmother if you didn't get this, So I know so many people who say that they got it just because they wanted to visit their mom in a nursing home. People missed out on funerals,
everyone. Yes, you're right. Everyone, this is such a powerful moment because you've really built it up very well, Derrick. You're very well spoken. I'm so grateful to have you on today. And you were talking about, how they keep dragging their feet and sweeping under the rug. Like, the people, we all got to realize, with the proper support, the thing is, the work is already being done. You warriors have really literally figured out the legalities and the way forward, but there isn't enough momentum. They aren't addressing the grievances. So you simply need more support in the energies and efforts you're already putting into it, in the legalization, everything. So warriors, like civilians, everyone needs to get behind, because the reality of it is, with enough emails, enough phone calls, and people showing up and addressing these individuals on the streets in a legal, confidential, peaceful way, they have no choice but to listen. And the point they don't listen, we start calling for the resignation, and they have no choice other than to resign. And when we install someone that will listen, right, that's how it begins. But there's a role to be played for every American. Every American. I get you dads out there doing a good thing, working hard and feeding your family. You can't essentially even fathom onboarding anything. But the reality, when someone's putting in all the work, like even copying, pasting this very episode and sending all your colleagues, all your family members, that in and of itself, and start communicating, having like those conversations at dinner, will create the momentum. Let's go ahead and plug in this moment, the military accountability. I forget what document you guys
the Declaration of Military Accountability. You can find that at www.militaryaccountability.net or .com, whichever one. It's a document that was drafted by one of the people within our community, and he is actually the author of a book, Defending the Constitution Behind Enemy Lines. And his name's Robert A. Greene.
One more time, it's militaryaccountability.net, correct?
Certainly. Yeah, militaryaccountability.net. That's where you can find the Declaration of Military Accountability. And it's a document that's been submitted to Congress. It's basically stating that it was signed by myself and 230 other service members, either active duty or retired, who were affected by this in a negative way. It's basically saying that we're calling for accountability. We're not getting any accountability, and we're doing everything within our power to lawfully and justifiably, seek that accountability.
Signatures. Yeah,
it's been signed by quite a few people, even despite the fact that the website is pretty much blocked on just about any social media. If you try to plug this in, it just gets algorithmically censored into the ether, basically. So,
guys, it's so simple. It's right here. Read it. It is very powerful. It might just ignite that spark because the reality of what these men are doing, it's not just seeking accountability and restitution for their, specific situation. It's on behalf of the freedoms and the benefit to all of us, because it is clear without addressing this, they will continue. Tyranny never ends. Okay.
Well,
They will continue. They will continue.
Not just that, but this is also insanely important for our country as a whole because of our military readiness.
Yes.
What they did to people within the military community, people like myself who, drank the Kool-Aid and were willing to die for this organization. They're not getting us, they're not recruiting and retention is down for a reason. And they want to paint it out like it's DEI and all this diversity and equality, which that's a pretty big annoyance. I can see how that would discourage quite a few people from joining. But the true reason for our disastrous recruiting and retention problem is the fact that people within the military, generational military families, saw what this organization was willing to do to its bravest soldiers, and what they were willing to, basically the way they were willing to treat us, and they got out, and they're telling their kids not to join. And they're telling their kids to tell their kids not to join. And it'll stay that way as long as this organization continues to be a hollow shell of all of the values and morals that it claims to portray. You know what?
Talking about betrayal, talking about no moral, any ethics. You mentioned something really powerful briefly pre-chat, or it might have been on our call yesterday, regarding your oath. I would like for you to share a bit your stance on your oath, and maybe that will create some encouragement for other service members and civilians to respect the decision and essentially what you stood for.
Well, I mean, my oath means a lot to me. I was like I said, I was willing to die. I was an infantryman. I was willing to die for this country. I was willing to die for those, to the left and the right of me. And I took an oath to the people of this country, not to the government of this country. And my oath is, it's until I die. It's not like I'm declaring what is already true. I'm not like saying this oath out loud and then it's magically, a part of me. Like my oath was, me stating out loud that I am willing to die for this country, and I'm willing to put in the work necessary to preserve the rights that we've already been gifted. Millions of people have already died. All the war and all the bloodshed is over with. All we have to do is shake off tyranny like a dog does water on its back, but we don't realize the power that we truly have. And we have this collective social apathy, and it's heartbreaking, man, because there's 2% of the people doing 98% of the work. And, and all it takes is, for everybody to just have a little bit of social awareness and maybe, stop caring about these trivial things that don't necessarily matter in the long run, and kind of take a risk. Like this whole thing, they painted this out to where if you stood out against this, you were looked at as some crazy whack job. So then people started self-censoring. And then that's when you start self-censoring, that's when tyranny has already won. And so many people are living in this world of this pretend freedom. You think you're fucking free because you have the ability to choose between Coca-Cola and Pepsi,
Right.
But, like you're as free and you're as enslaved as you believe you are. And
I love it. To your point, the image I just pulled up, very powerful image. A lot of people have seen it. Some surprisingly haven't, but it's the most powerful picture some folks claim they've ever seen. If people stand up, the game is over, and it gives you a visual. We're very visual creatures, and you could see these elitists playing essentially a game of, let's just say, Monopoly on our backs. We are the table. And it's just like, guys, you realize, because we are the masses and there's nothing to fear. And yes, I'm sure evil has some other things up their sleeves. They may pull up some weapons and but in the grand scheme of things, there would be far less death, far less suffering, if in fact we stood up now, there would have been less suffering if we stood up yesterday more so than now. There'll be less suffering.
If the
Yes.
fight was hopeless, their propaganda would not be necessary.
Exactly. And to the point of this shirt, my gosh, to those that got coerced, to those that didn't stand on behalf of their oath, like, don't you realize now, if you don't stand for something, you fall for everything. It's crucial that we source our information in this information age, that we question things. We don't allow their lies and manipulation to be effective with us. We got to gain back critical thinking. That's where I do feel the cornerstone for so many, it's God, but also because God will pave the way. But we got to take care of our bodies and our minds. And it's no secret that here in America, we've been targeted, we've been poisoned, we've been attacked 7 ways to Sunday for decades and generations now. And that, I feel, is a huge reason as to why people can't even onboard the thought as to bringing this into like their realm and taking action. I think strategically, that's why they're even squeezing the American, printing to no end, taxing to no end, to where we are demoralized. And it's like so many Americans are just accepting slavery at this point, or they're accepting ignorance to a degree that they feel that's going to somehow protect them.
People would prefer a comfortable lie over an inconvenient truth. And there is a lot of inconvenient truths that have been swept under the rug, and we've been fed, comfortable lies for so long that, yeah, it's like ripping a Band-Aid off. It sucks. This sucks. I really wish I was not doing this. I really wish I was just, doing my own thing. But I wish I could be selfish and but
it got bad for you. So what was the outcome for you in the infantry in the Army?
So once it finally came down that I was going to be getting kicked out, they basically told me I had 2 weeks to take care of all my affairs and clear post. So they fast tracked me through this career program it's like a 6-month program that's supposed to transition you back into normal life, get you set up with a job or whatever. They kind of fast tracked me through that as a formality. And then, I got kicked out with a general discharge. So I didn't have any benefits or anything like that. And
lost everyone.
Yeah. And I immediately filed for almost the week I got out, I filed for a discharge status upgrade, and I submitted all the paperwork that I had submitted during my appeal for my GOMAR. I submitted that. I submitted a list of character statements from pretty much everybody I served under that was stating that I was a stellar soldier who, even while getting kicked out, I stayed true to my oath and was out achieving my peers and blah, 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 blah. I sent them all that. 6 months went by. I couldn't file for unemployment because I didn't have an honorable discharge. I couldn't go to school. If I tried to go look for a job, they would ask me, "Oh, why'd you get kicked out of the Army?" And then I have to be left with this 50-50 roll of the dice of how they felt about the vaccine. And so I went to a few job interviews, and as soon as they found out about the whole vaccine thing, I never got a call back. So I assumed that was,
those are companies you don't want to work for.
Yeah. So then I tried to start my own business, and then I couldn't get recognized as like a veteran-owned business because I don't have an honorable discharge, and so I couldn't get any. I was basically just thrown out. I didn't really have a plan for where to live. So my girlfriend and I moved into her parents' house, and, I joined the military to try to set myself up for the future, and ended up kind of getting thrown 3 steps back. So after a while, I reached out to my congressman. I was reaching out to my congressman the entire time, and they seemed to only really want to focus on the discharge status upgrades because at the time they were trying to get as many of us as they could to go back in. because that was when the recruiting and retention problem started to show its face. And the politicians on one side were saying, oh, well, you guys are worried about recruiting and you just kicked out 8,600 service members, so that was a big spit in the face to them. So they were doing everything they could to run damage control on that. So they sent us, letters trying to beg us to come back, but nobody came back. And then I go to my congressman, ask him to do a congressional inquiry on my behalf to the Army Discharge Review Board and ask them basically like what's taken so long. And they tell me that it's going to, due to the sheer amount of people that they kicked out and the complexity of each one of these cases, it's going to take at least 2 years before they can even look at my case. So then my congressman gets that response back. And he says, okay, well, call me in 2 years if they don't do anything for you, and left it at that. And I'm like, hey, man, like I came to you with, my discharge status is one thing, but I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this for, this is a much bigger fight I'm focused on. And and every step of the way, he tried to pass me off onto other congressmen or tried to, it was like, hey, I'm coming to you with this problem. And then he would say, okay, well, what do you want us to do about it? And then if I didn't know like all the mechanisms of law and what powers congressmen have and blah, 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 and then like walk them every step of the way, like, hey, can you please file this form to this person or whatever, they just throw their hands up and act like, oh, yeah, we don't have any power at all. And then so I had to come back to them a couple months later after I had like scoured the internet trying to learn how the government works and stuff, because I was a dumb grunt. I don't know how to do any of this stuff. So I come back to them and I asked them, hey, can you guys write a letter on my behalf to the House Armed Services Committee? Okay. And they're basically in charge of watching over the DOD, the House Armed Services Committee. I asked them to write a letter asking why service members were never provided the FDA approved vaccines that we were mandated to take. And if so, could you provide proof of that? And they refused to write that letter. Okay, because they knew that if they wrote that letter, all I need is any government letterhead, any piece of paper with the government letterhead at the top of it, asking anything to anybody with any real power about why service members were never offered the FDA approved vaccines we were mandated to take. That would be like the checkmate in this entire scheme. And they, instead of doing that, they were like, oh, we're going to have to talk to our lawyers and see if that's something we can do. And their lawyers came back and said, no, we're not going to do that or whatever. And so their office is under the impression that all of these laws that were set into place around, informed consent and telling people what it is they're putting into their bodies, they're acting as if those are null and void because of the pandemic status. And I told them, like, no, that's not the case, because even if they were legally able to mandate these EUA products, they still would have been legally and morally obligated to inform soldiers what it was they were putting into their bodies instead of falsely representing it as something else. So it shows there an obvious premeditation, an obfuscating of the facts. If you were inside the meat grinder, you could see how the whole meat grinder works. You could see them pulling levers, and we would come back with a retort, and then the next day almost like a memo would magically come out, and it would, there was like a very, like, it's like insider baseball kind of, but if you were in it, you knew what it felt like to see them literally, like, we would respond with a justified, lawful response, and then they would just change the game by making a new rule. In the whole way, every step of the way, they were just making new rules and regulations and laws to basically cover up for the fact, because it's such an intricate and it's such a huge plan, and they've worked on it for so long. Well, their execution, they forgot a couple, they slipped up and we caught them. And then the whole thing has just been them running the optics of this to cover up the fact that we caught them in an unlawful act, and now, because we have them dead to rights, they just refuse to do anything. It's like we just don't touch it. if you never get tested for AIDS, you don't have AIDS. Is basically what their motto.
Oh my gosh. Well, the actual outcome of these shots are horrendous. And
Yep. And they're covering that data up as well. They took down the
yep,
DMED system as soon as people started to recognize the huge spikes in adverse events, and then all of a
yes,
sudden the system comes back online and all the data is different. But people caught screen grabs of that before it happened. People within the medical community come out and then voice their. Ted Macy comes out and literally shows, numbers of these huge increases in adverse events, and they stripped him of his credentials to make sure he couldn't
unbelievable.
give any more information to people.
It's why we got to get people on these free speech platforms. If you're getting information anywhere other than Rumble, Telegram, True Social, even X, like 100% you are being manipulated. Period. And
Well, we're all being manipulated. I mean,
yeah,
someone's going to think that we're trying to it's all about preserving your center, and like one of my favorite quotes is even the strongest of winds do nothing to disturb the waters of a deep enough well. And what these people are trying to do is they're trying to pull you away from your center, and to either by making you angry or making you lust for something or making you hunger for something that you didn't even want, and they're
yeah,
dictating your actions without you even knowing it. And so we need to approach these conversations from a place of like calm serenity, and try to have peace with one another, and truly try to find like a common ground. But at the same time, like, I'm done being polite to people. I'm done pretending that
just to
people
be
don't need
real.
to be shamed. I'm done pretending there needs
Because you have the receipts for everything. You're based in reality. You're based in truth. And that's where it's like fifth generation warfare has been very cunning, and it's been the slow drip. And we've all fallen prey to an extent, right? But the reality of it is true fifth generation warfare. What took place regarding you and civilians in this country infringes upon every single line item from the Nuremberg Code, which is in fact crimes against humanity. It is crimes against humanity. So we don't need to be like, I mean, we should be up in arms, but we should, as an individual, be excited to show up to do our part, period. So, in a sense, I'm actually bummed to a degree because so many are just self-serving and just either drink the Kool-Aid or something. Like, in a sense, I believe there would be less carnage if there were freaking nukes dropped in major cities in this country, but it would unify the people. And yet again, I even believe that would have led to less loss than what is happening, because this is perpetuating on for far too long. But people aren't making that freaking connection, which also just goes to show how effective they've been demoralizing and poisoning us to just like, yep, we're just walking right into our cellar, right into chains. It's like, why can't we just be excited because this is a moment in time. Like, no one individual could shoulder the burden, right? Every single American, and this goes to any country, any Australian, any Canadian, anyone. Well, I would say Russian, but I don't believe Vladimir Putin forced this upon any of his people, which even leads me like, our current administration's demonizing Russia. Now, I don't know. Like, I'm not a citizen of that country. I don't know all the history over there, but I genuinely would like to debate whether or not, like, Americans or Russians, who in fact lives more under a communist state. Like, it's debatable. And that should just be very alarming. I'm just trying to come out with the most radical analogies to kind of trick. Let's do our part. It isn't all doom and gloom. The reality of it is, if we may not be able to right this ship, but I do feel in unison, if we did stand up like the game, we don't know what else they would do. It is very interesting that the majority of these elites have not just singular bunkers, they got bunkers on all their estates. So it's kind of like, would they go the nuclear option? Would they go the EMP option? I do believe the film Barack Hussein Obama co-produced, forget the name of it, I hate to even plug it anyways, but essentially, like, what's the former president of this country creating a film where it is what, death to America, the end of the United States of America? Like, what? I believe that more so to be kind of a threat and a warning, documentary, more than a freaking entertainment film. Anyway, I digress. I get amped up, bro, because I love what you guys are doing. And when I hear your stories, and I could see the drain, the strain it's had on you. And it just breaks my freaking heart. I want to breathe light and life into you. And I imagine if just more people started supporting you, you'd have way more hope. You'd be more excited, and it wouldn't be, because I feel in a sense like I could see the weight on your shoulder, and it's just like, dang it. I'm glad you you mentioned me off air, whether you want it to be known or not, but I know you mentioned a hog hunt this weekend, and I wish you the best. And I know you need that. You need to disconnect for a second, recharge them batteries. You've been on these front lines on behalf of all of us, and I just want to thank you. I want to thank you for your service. I want to thank you for what you're doing. We have a clip here that you've provided where you're showing up on levels I am not. And I have the utmost respect and admiration for men like you taking that type of action. And I don't know. We are just an hour in. Is that something you want me to play now, or should I integrate it into other episodes?
Sure. I mean, you can go ahead.
Let's go ahead and play this clip here. What an example. What a leader. We really, truly need to follow in his footsteps to the best of our abilities, but more than that, support what he's already doing. All right, so asking Brian Babin's office for representation regarding the DOD's unlawful, illegal, criminal mandate. I added some words in there. And I am surprised that this hasn't been pulled down from YouTube. Might have not said the key words, but thank goodness for platforms like Rumble. I'm going to fast forward. You knock.
Yeah, there's actually a Ring doorbell on that door, and oftentimes I show up there and ring the doorbell, and I can hear them shuffling papers around the other side or having conversations and pretending like no one's there. So it's only because I caught this guy when he was about to leave and he couldn't pretend like he wasn't there that he actually answered the door. I usually show up to this office at least once a week, sometimes several times a week for the last 2.5 years. So they're pretty familiar with me.
What a freaking circus, my man.
Yeah.
What a circus. Let me continue that.
How you been? Good. Haven't heard back from you guys in a while.
So I haven't heard back from you guys in a while. He said the last time I spoke to their office, I went off on their other employees.
Yeah.
It's been a while. Yeah, it has been. So I was basically asking them to do anything, about the whole situation. And he told me that the office was under the impression that because there was a pandemic going on, that all of these laws that were broken weren't important. Is that still the position of this office?
Don't see Danny say that.
Okay, well, that in lesser words, we had like a 30-minute conversation, so just some of it was the office wasn't going to help me seek accountability because there was a pandemic going on, and then all of these laws around informed consent and, telling soldiers what was actually being put into their bodies, all of those laws were null and void.
Don't see Danny saying that at all.
Well, since then, we've come out with a Declaration of Military Accountability. Are you aware of that document?
No, I'm not.
You want to see it? Me and 231 other veterans signed this document.
He didn't answer because he didn't want to see it.
Oh, yeah.
Unbelievable.
They actually misspoke there. It's actually just 230.
Oh, okay.
And we're basically saying that we've reached out to people like you guys for the last 2.5 years, and have gotten zero response whatsoever.
Unbelievable.
And we're basically saying that we're trying to go through all the appropriate channels necessary to get any kind of accountability.
Perfect.
And you guys are not doing anything to help us. This document's been submitted into Congress already. You can find it at militaryaccountability.com. Since then as well.
Just a FYI, I believe it's .net actually.
Yeah, sometimes it's .net or .com. I think both of them work. I think if you type in .com, it just pushes it to .net.
Oh, okay.
Me and dozens of Texas veterans have come together and basically formed a coalition asking for accountability within the state of Texas.
Way to go.
Because elected representatives are refusing to act. I'm not trying to come in confrontational. The first thing off the rip is, I haven't heard from you in a while. I don't know why this office never contacted me back, why there's been zero motion on this whatsoever in the last 2 years. I've never gotten a single unsolicited phone call from this office about this incident, about this, situation. So now things have gotten to we've gone far beyond me just trying to reach out to this office for help, So it's documented. I've submitted my own affidavit of truth to Ken Paxton himself, along with several other service members in the state of Texas, saying that we've reached out, trying to get help from elected officials at every instance. And there's been nothing but resistance from elected officials. So you are aware that laws were broken during the pandemic, right? Within the DoD.
Good question.
He doesn't want to answer. He doesn't want to answer him because he doesn't want to get caught up.
The question answered, guy.
Okay, well, I just want to know
Right.
why
That's a strategic move.
Yeah,
that's when I
because
start getting pissed off.
reliably.
When I can see him gaming this conversation,
Yeah,
it upsets me a lot.
I get that. Oh my gosh. Just what
He
a clown.
immediately becomes, a politician.
Yes.
Trying to get help.
Because we are a legislature.
I know, you say you have zero power to do anything.
Correct. As a single member of Congress, you cannot force the DoD, a executive.
But you represent the people. I come to you as a constituent
Well said.
with a very big problem. And for the last 2.5 years, this office has tried to play me off as a disgruntled individual instead of a canary in the coal mine. And I've come to you with legitimate receipts for crimes that were committed. And every single step of the way, you said, let me see who I can talk to about this. Let me see who I can talk to about this. Tried to push me on to other congressmen. Maybe they can be more helpful. You've done nothing to actually represent a constituent with a very big problem.
We'll beg to differ on that.
Okay, well, why have I received zero unsolicited phone calls from this office about this issue? Why have I never gotten a phone call back? Why have I had to beg for a sit down with my elected representative and still not gotten one? Why have I had to say I will drive to Washington on my own dime if that's what it takes to get a sit down with my congressman, and I have still not gotten a phone call back for 3 years?
You've talked to a number of folks.
I've talked to you and I've talked to Danny, and what has Danny told me? You obviously had a conversation about how our conversation went, but you had never reached out to me once. You knew that I told him to go fuck himself.
Yes.
Okay, but you didn't know about the rest of the conversation, and if you did, why didn't you call me?
Wow.
Again,
So pause real quick. He tried to make it out as if I just spazzed out on their guy. And we had a 30-minute conversation where I articulately laid out the proof of what was going on and why it was the duty of his office to act. And at the end of it, he basically told me, like, hey, we're under a pandemic. Like, all of that doesn't matter. And I did. I spazzed out on him because he refused to let me schedule a meeting, because of this whole time I've tried to get a meeting with my actual congressman.
Yeah.
And these lackeys basically have been body blocking me from that. And I don't even know if my congressman is aware of this, Do
we all get called? Do you have their phone number? I personally would like to call this congressman. Why are you not hearing the grievances of our veterans?
His name's Brian. Let's see.
We should ramp up the pressure as civilians and get our voices heard. If they don't start taking action on this, then we're going to call for
his Washington number.
We're going to call for resignation.
202-225-1010. 1555. That's his Washington office. But I mean, even like Ted Cruz, I've spoken to Ted Cruz's office several times, and I spazzed out even more on them because the thing is I try to be very courteous. I try to be very cordial,
Yes.
very polite. I know that I'm coming to these
As you
people with
should.
like a highly contentious subject, and I'm trying to
Yes.
make it very palatable for them. And
Mhm.
so I'm very even patient when these staffers do things like this, which are obvious strategical political moves, where they're gaming the conversation. I've just been doing that for 2.5 years, and I see it for what it is now, and I don't have the patience for it. So when they like condescendingly tell me like, oh yeah, we don't have any meetings to schedule at this moment or whatever, but we'll get with our scheduler and have them contact you, knowing that they're never going to call me back. Like, it's
He's
just
so
such
busy. He's
and
so
spit in
busy.
the
I could
face.
tell. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and so I did kind of freak out and tell one of their staffers to go fuck himself. But apparently, that whole conversation, that 30-minute conversation where I articulated all of that, he either didn't hear about that or he did and then chose not to even call me and say, "Hey, I know we haven't talked to you in about 9 months. I know you were pretty much homeless last time we spoke to you. You're not like dead, are you?" Nothing.
Wow. Yeah, these are people that should not be in a position of power,
You
period.
have zero desire to do anything. That's what it is. You have the
Yeah.
power to
And
do
that's
whatever.
and that's your opinion.
Okay, that's my opinion.
No,
the
it's-
opinion of thousands of other veterans
No, that's my opinion too. And I believe the majority of our listeners.
who are in this
Empowered
position.
us with powers we don't have, Derrick.
Yeah, right.
You're not using the powers that you do have.
Well said.
That's bullhorn.
Okay, that's
No.
fine. The court of public opinion will decide that. Okay,
Yes.
I'm going to give you the documents that I've already submitted to several other people. Okay, to make you aware of it, because you obviously, are you aware that my discharge status got overturned? Is this office aware of that? They sent you guys a letter.
I have not seen the letter.
Oh, okay, well, you should read that letter. Because
Wow.
it says in a 5-0 vote, my discharge status was overturned because I requested an FDA-approved vaccine, and no FDA-approved vaccine was ever provided.
He did just admit he's not doing his job. Just
Yeah,
there.
he admitted that he never even read the letter
Yeah.
sent back from the Army Discharge Review Board stating my discharge status was over. So if that's true, then according to him, I'm still homeless with general discharge, no benefits, kicked out of the Army, still haven't gotten a single unsolicited phone call.
Wow. My hat is really off to you. I know those are very, very challenging. So many Americans just don't even have the kahunas to have their grievances addressed like to that manner. That's where, I mean, if you do, my goodness, start knocking on those doors. But more importantly, we should call. You don't have to know everything about everything. You could just simply say, why are these people not being heard? We want this to be pushed along. If it isn't, we're going to call for your resignation and we're going to replace you with someone that will. Period. Like,
The thing,
and enough people do this.
these politicians are able to not act because the general public is, one, not aware of the minutiae distinction between EUA authorized and FDA approved because they got hoodwinked on that. And they're
Right.
also just not aware of the fight that we're fighting. But if people knew the fight that we were fighting, they would
Yes.
obviously be on our sides, and politicians would not be able to just not act on this. But
Exactly.
because it's such a contentious subject, and because it has been, such a heavily censored subject, we're fighting
In
like
their
salmon
world,
swimming
it's
upstream.
contentious. The majority of patriots on Rumble, we've known for a very long time, and it is clear. Some patriots will still take a more conservative stance, and I don't know about intent, but when you do enough research, like we know the freaking intent, and it is horrific.
I mean, at the very least, they were at least covering up, and controlling the narrative to push this, and why were they incentivized to do so? They could have 1,000 different reasons for why, but
Right.
there was never a level playing field. They had intentions, and they found whatever they could do to shove it down our throats and get us to swallow it. They would have told us that it made us fly if we would have believed it.
Oh my gosh. Right. Yeah, it'll give you cape.
Yeah, if they said the vaccine would have cured ED or something like that, you know, they would have sold billions of them.
Unbelievable. Well, Derrick, I love you, man, like a brother from another mother. Seriously. And everything you're doing. Like, I know I could even do better. And I'm just grateful to have an example like you, even in my life. So keep up the good work. Keep your head up high, man. And just don't shoulder the whole burden, right? That's what we're trying to accomplish here. And folks, if you got contacts, if you got other people with even bigger platforms than me in Unmuzzled Chat, please reach out to these soldiers. Okay, please check out the Forgotten Soldiers podcast. They're airing so many of these veterans and active duty soldiers' stories, and they're also now opening their platform for civilians as well. We need to fire up the community to where it is just like that saying, rising tide's going to rise all ships. You have some contacts that could greatly benefit us. We're trying to show up on behalf of the betterment for you and our futures and our children's future and freedom and the future of this country. We're born in this time. We cannot afford to be ignorant. We can't afford to stand down and let it go to the wolves. We must protect this blessed country that was gifted to us, and it's being torn away from all of us. You can see from all these other tactics and the invasion and everything. And we got to show up in a sense in 2020 to where it's too big to rig, or in 2024 coming up, excuse me. Because we all know what happened in 2020. Anyway, once again, though, to let it lie on any one man's shoulders, that's a joke. It's we the people. We must unite. We must gain the keys back. Let's not hand it over to any other president ever again. It's we the people. And even at the president level, if they aren't fulfilling what we want done, we'll call for their resignation. Period. And we can do that. They're afraid of that. They're afraid of us unifying. That's why they're fighting so hard on propaganda, conspiracy theories, and anti-free speech. Period. You know, we're just trying to show up to the capacity we can. So, Derrick, thank you so much for joining the podcast today. I look forward to scheduling you back on and going into more detail on a lot of the things you guys are all actively doing. Do you have any other burning desires?
I just want to thank you for having me on. This is a very, very important story, and it's a great service that you're doing for giving us a platform to tell it. We're trying to shotgun blast this out to the entire world, and we've been kind of fighting upstream the entire time. So you're doing us a huge service by kind of using your platform to allow us to get this message out. We're 3 years behind the ball on this. And a petition's one thing, but it's really just a poster for the war that's being fought right now that 99% of this country bent the knee to, and we just got to fight for what's ours.
Yes, 100%. Let's gain the excitement to do just that. And let's do what Derrick just said right there. Shotgun blast this to everyone. As far and wide, do not discredit yourself and the impact you could have. You could send it to that one person that sends it to that one person that actually really has connections, and it makes a great difference. Use all your socials. Use the contacts in your phone. Let's go. Let's do this. Comment, like, share, all the above. So I'm not sure if you're aware, Derrick, but we got some affiliations here. And as I plug some of the affiliations, I want you to consider, because I believe they would in fact be excited to hire and onboard you. And it could bless your life. So Patriot Mobile, I'm extremely grateful, because not every company is going to align with Unmuzzled Chat. We're pushing against the grain. So it's really cool that company, it just goes to show that they're all about freedoms. They're the only Christian conservative network out there. And I'm sure there's job opportunities, things of that nature. But for our listeners, check out their webpage. See what they're all about. Give them a call. you in fact could save potentially money, increase your cellular service, and gain a level of protection. Just simply mention Unmuzzled when you give them a call or follow the prompts in the links below. EMP Shield is a call to action. Like, don't get left stranded. That's another amazing company. They build out these products. I mean, Keystone Compliance did all the testing, and they are cream of the crop. They do all sorts of military testing, industrial testing, and these EMP shield devices you could put in your vehicle, on your home, or on your solar systems will protect all of them from 3 wavelengths of EMPs, lightning, and solar flares. And those are grave threats. So do not be left stranded. And click the link below. Another company I'm really excited about is this American Reserves. Once again, that 30-day supply I have right here is freaking nothing. I feel we all should have a 3-month supply for everyone in our family. And they have some promos and discounts. Just be sure to add Unmuzzled for an additional 10% off their promos and discounts. Check them out today. This shirt right here, come on, folks. It's time we gain some patriotic merch and stand for truth. Through Black Eagle Apparel, you can exclusively get an Unmuzzled Chat t-shirt. We would greatly appreciate that. We're still waiting for someone to send some pictures of them out in public. You know what? I had a personal friend do it, and I'm grateful to her. So shout out to Caitlin. But, you know, it would be nice for someone to send a picture in to unmuzzledchat@gmail.com that I don't know. And at the point you do that, I'd like to send you a gift. So just throwing that out there. Once again, Derrick, thank you so much. God bless you, listeners. God bless America. Until next time, take care.